Thank you so much for having me, and good morning, everyone. Really quickly, before I get started, I'd like to have a round of applause for all of our volunteer organizers that brought us all together today and yesterday, so thank you to them. And then also someone else that gets kind of left in the shadows, literally, the team from Encore, who's here doing all of the AV and video for us. Let's hear it for them as well. All right, so I want to talk about a decade with DORA. Now, I'm going to guess that some of you know DORA. If you don't worry, you'll get to learn about a decade's worth of history with DORA. But to start with DORA, we kind of have to go back into the prehistory, the prehistoric days, if you will. In fact, I want to go back to 2009. There was a talk that Paul Hammond and John Allspaw gave at the Velocity Conference that year. That talk was called 10 Deploys Per Day, Dev and Operations at Flickr. I don't know if any of you were in the room. I can say plainly that I was not, but this talk was groundbreaking at the time. In fact, people were very angry with John and Paul for suggesting that you could do 10 deploys a day. One of the things, going back and looking at that slide deck, that really stood out to me was how they described the role of operations. Operations is here to enable the business. And in fact, they said that's dev's role also. As it turns out, that's sales role and marketing role and finance role. We're all here to enable the business and to drive great customer experiences. They also said that ops' role was lowering the risk of change through tools and culture. This, many say, is where DevOps was born. And this was one of their, sort of memorable slides from the talk, Dev and Ops together in a heart. So that was summer of 2009. A few months later, a guy named Patrick Dubois had organized and held the first DevOpsDays. So we in this room together are a community that has been gathering for about 15 years now, coming together to learn more about how to use technology to drive our organizations forward and to create great customer experiences. So, good morning. My name is Nathen Harvey. You'll see that based on the slide, I own exactly one shirt. And you're not wrong if that's what you believe, so don't stand too close. That is my advice to you. I work at Google Cloud. I've been there for about 6 years now. I've been involved in one way or another with DORA essentially from the beginning. And there is this question of when did DORA start? Well, as it turns out, DORA didn't just form out of nothing. It, just like DevOps, kind of came onto the scene based on the work of others. And in fact, that work began in 2011. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. I shouldn't go that far back into the future. I want to tell you a little bit about DORA first. So what is DORA all about? Many of us know the DORA 4 metrics, or the 4 keys. We've heard about that before. But really, DORA is trying to answer this question: how can a business get the most ROI, the most out of investments in technology and technologists? It's not just about the tools, it's about us, the people that are driving those systems forward. And DORA has this understanding and this belief that in order to improve, the first thing you need is a way to assess how are you doing today. So once we know how we're doing today, we can then start to identify areas where we want to improve. But here's the problem. Areas where we want to improve. I can't see you if you raise your hands, but I will just imagine that they're being raised. How many of you have only one area that needs to be improved? Yeah, there are no hands going up. How many of you can think of about 100 different things you'd like to improve tomorrow? Now I see all of the hands going up, which I just lied to you. I can't really see you at all. But I know from experience this is how this works. So we need a way to prioritize which of those 100 things should we work on next. Where should we put some of our energy and effort? And then importantly, we need a way to get feedback on how those improvements are going. We need to understand what's actually happening based on what we're changing. And then you take all of this together, and what you need is the organizational culture, the muscles, and sort of that institutional culture to do this over and over and over again. If we really want to improve how we're delivering technology, the way that we're creating great working environments for our fellow employees, the experiences that we're driving for our customers, we have to stay committed to this. To me, this is the foundation of DORA, and I kind of sum it up in this phrase: DORA is here to help you get better at getting better. DORA is a mindset and a philosophy and an approach that pushes the idea of continuous improvement. So, where did DORA start? As I mentioned, it started long before DORA. In fact, if we go all the way back to 2011, there was a woman working at a company called Puppet Labs. Her name was Alana Brown, and she had this brilliant idea. You know, this DevOps thing, it's been going on for 2 years now. It feels like maybe it's just a buzzword, maybe there's something real to it. Let's go out and ask the industry. And at Puppet, they ran the first ever State of DevOps survey. And in 2011, they published this report. And I think it's fascinating. If you go back to 2011 and just look at some of these quotes, DevOps is not a new way of working. How many people have felt that for sure? Oh, this is nothing new. We've been doing this all the time. We just didn't have a name for it before. It does provide huge productivity gains, but many organizations are still trapped in dysfunctional silos. They have complex handoffs. And when something goes wrong, they spend a lot of time allocating blame. Thank goodness we've moved on beyond this, right? That was 2011. We've completely moved on beyond that. DevOps is a real thing. We've removed all of those constraints. Everything is better now. Of course, that's not really the case. But I would say that those of us that are here in the room today and watching the video, we, in many respects, we are driving this. We maybe even live this today, where we've released those shackles, where we are using failures to learn. We have come a long way, but it is important to recognize that not everyone is us. We all haven't made it into this future state equally. And so part of our responsibility in this room is to reach out to those friends and colleagues and coworkers across the industry and help them move forward as well. Now, since I am talking about a decade with DORA and I start at 2011, you might be asking which decade. I just want to admit that I am neither a researcher nor a mathematician, so my math might be a little bit off, but it's at least a decade, I want to just give you a quick pass through a couple of the reports that came out along the way. So starting in 2011 with the first one, we then jump ahead to 2013, and again, math, not my strong suit. See me at a break and I'll tell you a little story about the 2012 report. But in 2013, what did we find? We found that systems on which businesses operate are typically fragile and hostile to change, and that without improving operational reliability and collaboration, we only make the problem worse. This overemphasis on we have to move faster, we've got to take on agile software development practices so that we can build more. If we're not collaborating, if we aren't thinking about how these systems work operationally, we're just making the problem worse. 2013 was also the first year that those 4 key metrics from DORA, and if you don't know what they are, don't worry, I'll tell you more about them soon. Those 4 key metrics were first kind of published and came out. Interestingly, the way that they looked at how these 4 metrics were applying across teams in 2013 was they asked, and they sort of arranged teams based on how long have you been doing the DevOps? That wasn't the question they asked, but it's essentially what they asked. Have DevOps practices been in your organization for less than a year, for more than a year? We're just thinking about doing the DevOps, etc. So that's interesting. And then also, the common barriers to DevOps adoption are cultural. And the best way to overcome those cultural barriers is to start a conversation. This to me, this is the foundation of why we are a community, why we come together. It is about culture, and it is about the conversations that we have, both here in this space, in the open spaces, more importantly, and as you go back to your offices and talk with your colleagues and coworkers. But it's interesting that this has been part of the DevOps movement from the very beginning. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that, thinking about all of the great tools that we have today. Fast forward to 2014, this was the first scientific study to really look at how teams are doing. 2014 is interesting because Dr. Nicole Forsgren joined the effort. So in 2014, Dr. Nicole Forsgren was in academia. She left academia to come into industry and help us understand how are we performing, how do we improve, and so forth. There was also one of the best things, I think, from 2014. At the end of the survey, they asked respondents, if you work for a public company, please give us the stock ticker for your public company. And they took that data and they looked at how are teams performing. They compared the highest performing teams to the lowest performing teams with those stock tickers, and they looked at what is their market performance. And you can see here that those 355 top performing companies had a 50% higher market capitalization growth over that 3-year period. And this was really the foundation where we could say definitively, with data, with science, that improving your software delivery performance improves your organizational performance. So I think that's really cool. And then also, they talked about changing the economics of delivering software. How expensive is it for you today to ship a change to production? What does that cost your organization? What does it cost in terms of dollars, in terms of focus, in terms of the people that are responsible and actually make that software change get into production? And how can we as a community start driving that cost as close as possible to zero? This is a fundamental question, I think, of everything that we're doing. As I go through the reports, whenever they were credited, I will also share with you who the authors were. So in 2014, as I mentioned, Dr. Nicole Forsgren came along. She, from that point forward until later in our story, was the lead researcher around the State of DevOps report that Puppet was putting out. And eventually, you'll see, she goes on to form a company called DORA. All right, fast forward to 2015, lean management comes in. Look, DevOps builds on the shoulders of Agile, now starts building on the shoulders of lean management as well. And if you don't know about lean management, this is the place where we think about things like, how do we decrease the number of work items that we have in process? How do we ship smaller changes? How do we get faster feedback? We're learning a lot from other industries. And then also in 2015, you have more economic benefits from investing in improved stability. So again, we start to see this echo of, yes, we want to move faster, but at some point, we're going to be moving fast enough that if we aren't also looking at stability, we're leaving a lot of money on the table, if you will. We're introducing a lot of churn, and potentially, we're not getting the most out of our investments. Now, as we move on to 2016, this is the first time that DORA appears, DevOps Research and Assessment. Around this time, Dr. Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humble, and Gene Kim founded a company called DORA. They were still partnered with Puppet and continuing the research here. So, interestingly, in 2016, they looked at employee net promoter score. Maybe you've heard of NPS before, the net promoter score. This is a good way of like assessing, hey, and no doubt you've participated in an NPS before, a net promoter score. Anytime you've had a survey from a company that said, hey, Rob, how likely are you to recommend American Airlines to a friend or colleague? That is an NPS. What's your answer, Rob? You don't have to answer that. Yes, he said yes. He said yes. It was a scale of 1 to 10, and he said yes. This is the challenge with collecting data. Thanks, Rob. But they found that employees that were in those high-performing teams, 2.2 times more likely to recommend their organization, and 1.8 times more likely to recommend their team. So we're starting to get indications that as we improve performance, we're actually focusing on the developer experience and job satisfaction, and that's starting to drive that performance. And they asked this interesting question in that 2016 report: what could you do with 10% more engineering time? I think this is a really great question that kind of stands the test of time. What could you do right now if your team had 10% more engineering time? Oh, I know, you could come to a DevOpsDays. That'd be great. That's a good thing to do. It's a good place to start a conversation. All right, 2016, a bunch of authors. Again, you see Dr. Forsgren. Alana Brown shows up as an author here. I want to be clear, Alana Brown is the reason that all of this exists. She's the one that initiated everything at Puppet that sort of launched this whole decade of DORA. All right, moving on to 2017. Now we've got a collaboration again between Puppet and DORA, and one of the things that they focused on is leadership. And I think that this quote here, it both resonates and it hurts a little bit. Within the DevOps community, we've sometimes been guilty of maligning leadership. How many of you in the room are leaders? Okay. Anyone who didn't raise your hand either doesn't like raising your hand when speakers ask you to raise your hand, or you're just a liar. Everyone in this room is a leader. You don't have to be a manager to be a leader. We are all leaders. The fact that you're here demonstrates that you are a leader within your organization. You're here to connect with the community and learn more. But it is often true, unfortunately, probably all of us have been guilty of this. Man, we'd be able to get a lot more done if only our leaders would get on board, if only they'd come along, if only they'd help us out. Well, so in 2017, they looked at this idea of transformational leadership. And they found that those teams that had good transformational leadership had better software delivery outcomes. You're able to perform more. But they also found, interestingly, that transformational leadership in and of itself, it's not enough. The way that transformational leaders show up is that they help indirectly. They help indirectly by allowing teams to flourish, teams to have the autonomy to do the things that they want to do. Leaders might help set a goal for where we want to go, set some context, but it's up to the team to make that progress. And this insight that leadership is about enabling the team and allowing them to move forward. Again, the authors, also in 2017, Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humble, Gene Kim got together and they wrote and published a book called Accelerate. If you've not read Accelerate, I strongly encourage you to put it to the top of your to-be-read list. I know that that list is probably very long. See what you can do to prioritize it. Accelerate was really the summation of all of the DevOps research that had been done from about 2014 until 2017. This book is, it was groundbreaking at the time, and I think that if you read it now, you would find lots of great nuggets. But I have a warning for you. One of the things that this book did was it kind of solidified those 4 key metrics. You know, lead time, deployment frequency, mean time to recover, and your change fail percentage. Here's the challenge though. It laid out those 4 metrics on page 17. And lots of people got there, leaders included, and said, I got it. We just got to look after these numbers. That's the rest of the book done. I've read the first 17 pages. That's all I need. The problem is, in order to get the most value out of this book, you have to read all the way through to the appendix. Appendix A, in fact, is where they introduce this model. This model is the structural equation model. It shows which capabilities predict better software delivery performance. How do you improve those 4 measures? You start with the capabilities. Those capabilities include technical capabilities, process capabilities, cultural capabilities, and so forth. So if you read Accelerate, if you read nothing else in Accelerate, only read the appendix. And if you've not read it, I have a copy over there. So if you want to, I can't give it to you. That's my copy. But you can leaf through it while you're here today. Also over there, I've got a binder with all of the State of DevOps reports printed out. If you want to flip through a couple of them, it's pretty fun. This is the point in our story where we take a fork in the road, though. So you see, this company named DORA had been formed. They'd partnered with Puppet Labs for a long time. But at the end of 2017, there was a fork. There was a split, in fact. At this juncture, DORA continues doing research through surveys and publishing reports. Guess what? Puppet Labs continues doing research through surveys and publishing reports. And in fact, what reports do they publish? Well, DORA publishes a State of DevOps report, and Puppet publishes a State of DevOps report. And today, there are states of DevOps reports all over the world from many, many different sources. I saw online recently there's a Salesforce State of DevOps report, or maybe it was a State of Salesforce DevOps report. Of course, Puppet continues to publish reports. DORA continues to publish reports. There's reports everywhere. So thanks for helping us all as scientists gather this data. So DORA DevOps research and assessment. In 2018, the next DORA-based report came out, and to help sort of differentiate itself from the Puppet reports, and as a nod back to that book, we took on the name Accelerate. So these are the Accelerate State of DevOps reports. And in this year, the research moved beyond just software delivery performance to include availability. Now, availability is a really difficult thing to measure because by availability, what we didn't mean was uptime. Is it available? But instead, we meant availability is the ability for a team to make and keep promises about the reliability of a service to its customers. So it's more than just uptime. It might be things like the speed of your service, the accuracy of the information that you're getting back, and so forth. But availability was the word that was used and how we started measuring that. It was also interesting in this time, in 2018, because cloud computing had really taken hold. It had taken hold for long enough that there were enough organizations out there that were really grumpy about cloud computing. Cloud was simply not delivering on its promises. People were previously working in the data center. They saw all the hipsters going over to the cloud. They saw lots of great benefits. They said, well, we'll just lift and shift and go to the cloud. And we're going to lift and shift our technology. We're going to lift and shift our process. We're going to lift and shift our culture and try to run it in the cloud. And what ended up happening? They spent more money. They had less visibility. It moved from capital expenditures to operating expenses. No one was happy. So we wanted to look into this. Why is that? Why do some people really get benefit from the cloud and others not? So again, we looked to other research areas. In this particular case, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. They published a paper that described and defined what is cloud computing and what are the characteristics of cloud computing. And what we were able to see in our research was that those teams that moved to the cloud and took advantage of these 5 characteristics of cloud computing, they saw great performance. Other teams that moved to the cloud and ignored these characteristics, so they didn't change anything, they saw negative performance. It was worse, and they were unhappy. And the easiest example of like what does that actually look like not shifting? Imagine the days where you're a developer and you need a new environment, but all of your environments live in a data center. So how do you get a new environment? Well, you open up a ticket, right? You open up a ticket, it sits in a queue. Somebody picks it up and goes and deploys a machine into that data center. And by deploys a machine, I mean they probably physically went to the data center and like put a machine in the rack. And then they tell you, hey, it's ready. And then you're like, okay, but I can't log into it. They're like, yeah, well, you said you wanted a machine. You didn't say you wanted an account on that machine. The machine is there. What's your problem? And so you go back and forth through this whole ticket queue, right? When they moved to the cloud, guess what they did? The same thing. So to get an instance on the cloud, you opened up a ticket. You went through the whole back and forth in the ticket queue, and eventually you got an access to the cloud. As a developer, I don't care where that machine runs. It's only if I take advantage of these characteristics, on-demand self-service in particular, that I can actually receive real benefit from that. Now, the other thing that was really important in the 2018 report that really stood out to me was the first time in our reports that we discussed the J-curve of transformation. Now, this is a foundational principle for anything that you're trying to adopt, whether you're trying to transform your organization or you're trying to do the DevOps, or maybe today you're trying to bring in AI and make everything better with AI. What's going to happen? This is what's going to happen. You're immediately going to find some low-hanging fruit. You're going to pick all of that fruit. You're going to recognize some immediate gains from whatever it is you try. But once you've realized those immediate gains, it is highly likely that you're going to see a dip in productivity and performance in whatever it is that you're striving for, because you've taken out the easy stuff. And now you get to the harder stuff, the more difficult stuff that takes commitment. And the commitment is important because what happens on the other side of that dip is you really start to actually realize the real benefits from that new thing, that new process, that new technology, that new way of working, whatever it is. But often what happens while we're down there in that trough, we give up. DevOps is dead. Let's move on to SRE. That's going to be better. Oh, SRE started really great, but now we're in this dip. Let's move on from that to platform engineering. Oh, now we're making great gains. Oh, but now we're back down in this dip. This is terrible. Let's throw AI at the problem. This is what we go through as an industry, cyclically. And we should expect and plan for this in any type of change that we're making. And the truth is that's true in big changes that we want to make. It's also true in small changes that you want to make. Think about, I don't know, I'll just share some personal experience. I decided I wanted to get fit, so I bought a Peloton, and I got on that Peloton. I rode it a lot until I didn't, and then I didn't want to get on that Peloton. But eventually got back to it, and that helped, So this is sort of foundational knowledge and insight that you can apply in a lot of different ways. All right, so let's move on to 2019. An amazing thing, a thing happened at the end of 2018. DORA, the company, was acquired by Google Cloud. So in 2019, this was the first publication of a State of DevOps report from Google Cloud, still run by DORA. One of the most important things about DORA, though, is that it is platform and program agnostic. So being part of Google Cloud doesn't mean we go and research how do you get better on Google Cloud. It's still the same idea of how do we help teams improve and drive that technology forward. Here was a really sad stat from that report, and I think we haven't revalidated this, primarily out of fear. I'm afraid it might have gotten worse. So 40% of respondents, only 40% of respondents, perform disaster recovery at least annually. At least annually. I hope that everyone in this room, you can raise your hands if this is true. I hope you've tested your disaster recovery process within the last 12 months. Raise your hand if it's true. You should lie to me. You just put your hands up. I don't want to know anything else, right? Can you imagine that? It's been more than a year since you've practiced your disaster recovery. Those backups are running, so we're probably fine. It's not how it works. We also started to look deeper into developer experience. Teams, high-performing engineers were 1.5 times more likely to have tools that were easy to use. And there might be a little bit of influence here based on who just acquired DORA, but search became a key contributor to performance as well. Teams with really great internal search, 1.73 times better, and the use of external search was 1.67 times more likely to be productive. External search. I don't know if you've ever worked in an organization. I haven't, but I've encountered them, where corporate policy blocks access to, places like Twitter, YouTube, Stack Overflow. How can you go find better answers, right? We block those in an effort to improve productivity, but we're actually dragging it down as well. And what does that mean today in the era of AI? Do policies within our organizations prevent us from using that, prevent us from taking advantage of these new tools? And if so, how do we go and change that? This other thing happened, though, in 2019. DevOps had been running for 7 years now, and there were small pockets of DevOps success in lots of organizations. And in many organizations, they were saying, great, well, those couple of teams over there, they're like working on greenfield stuff, or they're very special, they're seeing progress. How do we spread that progress more globally across our organization? So we looked at different ways that organizations actually transform. How do you actually drive those changes? And what we found was that the top performers, the way that they drove those changes was not from the top down. It was by creating communities of practice. A community of practice that looks very much like a DevOps Days. We get together, we share ideas, we learn from each other, we take those ideas as inspiration for the things that we want to change. That's a great way to drive how you spread this insight, this new way of working around your organization. Our 2019 authors, Dr. Nicole Forsgren, still leading up the research. At the end of 2019, and at the beginning of 2020, something happened. You might remember it. The sad news is in 2020, we did not run another DevOps survey. We did not publish a DevOps report. There were, things going on around the world. But we didn't miss reporting something. In fact, at the very end of 2020, we released the ROI of DevOps transformation. This is a white paper that builds on some of the work from the 2016 report, but gives us financial equations that we can sit down with our finance team, we can sit down with leadership and say, look, as we ship software faster, as we ship software safer, here are the value that we're going to generate. Here's the extra revenue that we're going to get. Here's the cost savings that we're going to have, and even formulas to help us as engineers talk in their language, talk about how long is it going to take to pay back our investments in improving. So I think that this is probably one of the most underutilized resources. You should go check it out at dora.dev/publications. All right, moving on to 2021. There were a bunch of things that happened in 2021. The first was, hey, Dora's part of Google now. Google's been talking about SRE for a few years now. It's worked really well within Google. We're starting to see teams around the industry starting to adopt SRE practices, but is it working? We don't have any data to back it up. So we introduced a lot more SRE-style capabilities that we asked about, and we were able to prove out that SRE and DevOps are complementary. It's not an either-or situation. These are absolutely complementary of each other. And to get the best out of your technology investments, you need both. You need good software delivery performance, and you need great operational performance as well. Another really interesting thing happened beginning in 2021. We said, what about documentation? Does documentation matter? And in fact, this might not surprise you based on how I've set it up, documentation does matter. And we've, for the past 3 years, have been looking into how documentation impacts a team's ability to deliver and operate software, to hit those organizational goals. And it's super powerful. I'm not going to read you the numbers, 3 times X, 2 times whatever. It helps. It helps a lot of different things. You can read on the slide. I'm not going to read it to you. We also, of course, found that teams with generative culture tend to do better. But we were just coming out of, or we thought maybe we were coming out of lockdown, and we wanted to understand how about burnout during that lockdown period when COVID was happening. And we found that those teams with generative culture that were made up of people who were included and felt like they belonged on the team, so a good, healthy culture on the team, those teams had 50% less burnout than teams that didn't have that strong, healthy culture. Again, another reason why we have to focus on culture and the people. Again, our authors, we've got 5 authors now. At this point, Dr. Dustin Smith has taken over as the lead researcher. Nicole Forsgren has moved on, I believe in 2021. She may have still been at Google. Eventually, she went off to GitHub, and now she's at Microsoft Research. But Dustin took over as our lead researcher there. 2022 came along. We were looking at things like security. There's this great quote from the report. The ease with which an organization can safely and confidently change its software is a measure of the software's quality. I think that the ability to change a piece of software is probably the most important feature that you have for any application that you're working on. Can you change it? I think that we oftentimes get a little bit hyper-focused on how do we launch a new application? How do we start a new application? How long does it take me to go from 0 to the application is running? This is all important stuff to look at. But the truth is, once that application is running, the first thing we're going to do, or the next thing we're going to want to do, is change that application. And as soon as we change it, we're going to want to change it again. And we're always needing to change our applications, maybe because we want to make them more reliable, maybe because we want to make them serve our customers better, maybe because we didn't get time to build that feature when we first launched. But that changeability is a super important measure of how well your application is working. We looked, as I mentioned, at security practices, and turns out it's not which tool are you using to help secure your systems, it is culture. Culture that is the #1 predictor of whether or not you're taking on good security practices. There were a bunch more authors in 2022, and in 2022, Dr. Dustin Smith moved on to other things within Google, and Derek DeBellis took over as the lead researcher. He continues to be the lead researcher on DORA today. After 2022 was launched, I had this realization. I'd been working with customers around the world, talking to them about DORA, talking to them about change, and the truth was I didn't have all of the answers. But I also felt that all of these people that I was talking to needed to communicate with one another. And so we launched the DORA community. This is a great place where we have today thousands of practitioners, leaders, and researchers coming together to discuss these topics and these insights, talking about the challenges of putting these practices into place. If you aren't a member of the community, it might not surprise you. I'm going to ask you, you should join the DORA community and come help us all learn more about how do we get better at getting better. Now, beyond that, As we were talking with the community, we also had this realization that, I showed you one of these earlier, a SEM, a structural equation model. These became sort of a customary piece of every report. And what they showed you was the predictive nature, those connections between capabilities and outcomes and what we were trying to drive. The problem was each year we put out a different SEM. And so which model should I follow? How do I know what good looks like? And because we research different things every year, it's really hard to kind of follow that thread. So in the time between the 2022 report and the 2023 report, we said we want to smash all of these together and give a good view of what that looks like. And we introduced what we call DORA Core. This is our core model for how capabilities impact performance, impact those outcomes. It was this idea, don't worry, I'm about to put it back up. I saw the camera go up to take the picture. It's going to come right back. But this core model helps us really illustrate capabilities, predict performance, which predicts organizational outcome. So there it is again. You can find this at dora.dev/research, but the point here is that those 4 key metrics, they're kind of that green box in the middle. Yes, they're predictive of better organizational performance, but I don't get better at deployment frequency by thinking about deployment frequency. I have to change how I work, the tools that I use, what I do, etc. That's where those capabilities come in. We also, jumped on the AI bandwagon in this time between the 2022 and 2023 report, and we launched this little experimental site called ask.dora.dev. Here you can go and you're behind the scenes, you're leveraging Vertex AI and Vertex Search to ask and interrogate the research program. You can go and ask questions like, what does DORA have to say about developer productivity? When did it last research burnout? I don't know. Ask it whatever questions you like, but you can check that out. All right, enough of the time between 2022 and 2023. Let's get into 2023. There were a bunch of things that we looked at in 2023. I want to just touch on 2 of them. The first, of course, no surprise, is AI. In 2023, we researched AI. So this was last year, and the time of our data collection ended around July. Of course, a lot has changed with AI since last July. It's been almost a year now. But what did we find? Well, unfortunately, we saw that teams that were using AI, we weren't seeing any real improvement to their software delivery performance. We weren't seeing any real improvement to their organizational performance. And we guess that there's a yet at the end of that. Perhaps this year we will find that. But we did see one thing that was interesting and that there's worth having a little bit of optimism about. Teams that were using AI, the people on those teams reported an improved well-being. So more job satisfaction, less burnout. This makes sense to me. I'm an engineer. I want to play with all the new stuff. So let's go play with it. And if I have the autonomy and the ability at work to play with these new things, it's a fun experience. Working with a GPT and having those conversations the first time, that was fun. It still can be fun. And so it's good to see that that was already starting to show up. Hopefully this year we'll see some additional impacts. Of course, we're digging in a lot deeper. But the other thing that we looked at last year was about users. And do you care about your users? How are you focused on your users? And how are you letting your users drive the change that you're making? We found that teams that are really focused on the users have 40% higher organizational performance and 20% higher job satisfaction. Lots and lots of authors. That's all of the reports to date. Of course, we're working on, well, we aren't working on a report yet, but I'll talk about what we are working on right now. Now, I want to just come back to this idea of DORA, DevOps Research and Assessment. Look, you're here today at a DevOpsDays, so you're a believer in DevOps. But the truth is, we're continuing to see too many DevOps teams and, oh, that's not my job, that's the job of DevOps. And this report and this research is not meant just for DevOps engineers. This report and research is for any technology-driven organization. So I'm on a mission to de-acronym DORA. DORA no longer stands for DevOps Research and Assessment. DORA is all about how do we help technology teams improve, and importantly, how do we help them get better at getting better. So I worry sometimes that the word DevOps closes as many doors as it opens today. And I don't want to close those doors. I want to bring more people into our fold, into our community, to help drive this community and what we're doing forward. I want to talk briefly about those 4 key metrics. We all know and love these 4 key metrics. You have 2 metrics for speed, 2 metrics for stability. These metrics can apply to any type of application that you're running, whether it's a mainframe application or a mobile application or what have you. But it is important that these 4 measures are meant at the level of an application or service. We don't ask, how frequently does Google deploy to production? That number is large and mostly meaningless. We can't make a decision based on that. But if we look at a single application or service and look at those metrics, that's where this starts to become valuable. One of the great insights from DORA, though, is that throughput and stability are not trade-offs of one another. If you want to be fast, you have to be stable. If you want to be stable, you have to be fast. These 2 reinforce one another. So how do you measure those 4 key metrics? Well, boy, they look pretty simple. I bet we have system data that we can just integrate together and put them all on a dashboard. You probably do, but don't. I think the best way to measure these 4 measures is to just start with a little self-assessment. At DORA.dev, we have a quick check. You can go and literally, via like a survey, answer these questions. What is your lived experience? That will give you enough insight to start making changes. If you don't believe me and you want to build a dashboard, don't. There are plenty of vendors out there that you can go to, both open source and closed source. Here's just a sampling of them. And I'm not endorsing any of them, but these are all of the vendors out there that are giving you DORA metrics and other software engineering insights. The key takeaway, though, is that performance, software delivery performance, drives those outcomes that we care about. Culture is the cornerstone. It is foundational to everything that we do. In 2014, the DORA team first introduced Ron Westrom's work on organizational topology. We found that you will find teams, and you've probably worked on teams, that are power-oriented, that are rule-oriented, or that are performance-oriented. And you want to be on, and the best outcomes come from those performance-oriented teams. The way that you improve is not by looking at those performance metrics, but instead by looking at those capabilities. Find where is your constraint. Look at this map. Find what's holding you back, and as a team, commit to improving that thing. As a team, decide this is where we're going to inject AI to help us improve that thing. Who knows what? Change something about that capability that will drive performance. You are on a journey of continuous improvement, which means you're going to fail. It also means you're going to succeed. And these 2 things are both things that should be celebrated, as long as you take the lessons that you learn and you put them into action. Of course, there are more benefits with DORA beyond just performance, things like well-being. We want to improve the well-being and the lived experience of everyone on our team. Now, just as I wrap up here, I only have about 2 minutes left. I want to talk about the future of AI. Sorry, not the future of AI, the future of DORA. What is the future of DORA? Where does this leave us, especially in an era of AI? I strongly believe that DORA gives us a great foundation on which we can start to improve and inject and incorporate AI into the work that we're doing. But not just AI. Also, platform engineering that we want to change. Also, whatever it is that we're going to all be super stoked about after AI. DORA can help us with that. The idea is to get a baseline, understand where you are today, set a goal for how do you want to improve, invest in the capabilities, the tools, the process, the people that are going to help you make progress towards that goal. And then you can use those 4 software delivery metrics as a guardrail to validate or invalidate the experiments that we're taking on. As I changed this thing, those metrics improved. As I changed this thing, those metrics decreased. What can we learn from that and put into practice? My final request to you is to participate in this year's survey. But I don't want you to participate in this year's survey so that I can have, and our team can have your data to investigate. The reason I want you to participate in this year's survey is this gives you and your team 15 minutes to sit and reflect. What are you doing today? Where could your team start making improvements? I encourage you to sit down individually, everyone on your team, take the survey, and then come together and hold a quick retrospective. What questions were easy to answer? Which questions were hard to answer? What things do we think we're really good at or areas where we could improve? And most importantly, what are we going to try next? What are we going to try next? Because this truly is about a journey of continuous improvement. You're going to take steps forward. You're going to take steps backward. It's okay. Learn from each of those steps. Take those lessons with you as you continue on the journey.